Hey guys, I'm Dimension Jumper, and today I'll be ranking all of the dungeons from Skyward Sword from worst to best. Now, with the dungeons from Skyward Sword, in my opinion, can be hit or miss depending on which dungeon I'm playing through. But I think they all serve the game really well in terms of plot, how they are done, depending on the dungeon, and yeah, I think each one is really nice when it comes to moving on the story and how you are able to do the different puzzles and stuff like that. So yeah, and in this video, I'll just be ranking each of them from worst to best. Now, this is my personal opinion, and how the dungeons are arranged in and stuff like that. So yeah. So for number seven, being the worst, is the Earth Temple. Now this is the second dungeon in the game, and it's one of the fire temples in the game as a whole. And I would say that out of the dungeons as a whole, as well as being one of the first out of two fire temples, it's probably my least favorite temple in the game, mainly because about 90% of the dungeon, you're just on this giant ball, and you have basically what you have to do is basically push these stone pillar things in to create a staircase, and you're on that for about 90% of the dungeon, and yeah, you don't really do anything else, and you rarely use um, the bombs. Like you only use it a couple of times. Once at the start, as soon as you get it. One when you're going through. Once towards at the start. Once, a few times during, I think it's once during when you're on the ball, and then you use it for the boss of the dungeon, and yeah, and I think it would have been cool a lot more better if you did use the bombs a lot more in the Earth Temple, because I think they could have been a lot more utilized, I would say. And yeah, but I do like the boss. I think the boss does help it a bit in terms of how fun it is, because Scaladra, which is basically this giant um, ball covered in fire, which was created by Girahim. It's kind of like the Dongo, in that he can create giant fireballs by just doing King Dodongo's famous breath attack or thing. So yeah, and you have to throw bombs into his mouth. And yeah, I would say the Scaladra is probably the best part of the dungeon. And yeah, even though he's the best part, I don't think he can save the Earth Temple by being the worst one in the game, I would say. So yeah, for number six is the Skyview Temple. So this is the very first temple in the game that you go to, and I would say it feels like a pretty generic dungeon that you go to, because it's this all woodland themed dungeon. And yeah, it does have like some like woodland or foresty themes to it. Like you've got some tree branches or tree roots, kind of like um kind of like in part of the dungeon. You've got like this sort of like flute music playing in the background, and you've got variety of foresty themed monsters. Like you've got the keys, you've got this Hydra monster that you fight towards the end of the dungeon, and yeah, you've also got spiders as well. They're quite foresty, woodland creatures. And why I think this is like quite low on the list is because this is the only dungeon that you go to twice, and the second time you can just rush through it if rush through it quite quickly, especially around the halfway mark, where you can just go straight to the end, because you'll have opened a shortcut when you first go to the dungeon. And yeah, I do enjoy the boss. Again, like with Scaladra for the Earth Temple, Girahim is a really good first boss fight, and I think it's a good boss fight to use in terms of the motion controls. And so, like, oh, this is a boss that's you can use your motion controls on, and kind of like see how it's done and stuff when it comes to a boss, that sort of thing. So yeah. For number 5 is the Lineru mining facility. Now this dungeon I would say is a good middle ground. It's got some good parts and some not so good parts. Like I do like how with each of the areas you go to in the facility, there are parts where you use a time shift stone, and that's really cool. And I do like how each of the room you can see how each of the rooms were operated in when they were in the past, and I do like the whole thing of you're seeing the past, but it's in the future, and you can only go to the see what's in the past if you hit a specific time shift zone. And yeah, I think it's okay. I think it's just one of those things. Was like, it's okay. It's one of those things where it's okay. I kind of wished it was kind of used in the boss fight maybe with when you're fighting against the giant scorpion. I think it's Moldarak. I think it's the name for the boss for that particular dungeon. And I think maybe if it was like one or two time shift stones, maybe you could like, and they could like cover half of the boss room. But I feel like that would have been a lot too easy, I would say, or maybe I don't know. But I think if there was a time shift stone or one or two of them, and they did cover half the dungeon, you can only use one, but you can use the other, and you could have Moldarak sort of disappear under the sand and go to the future area, and you can only deactivate it and then use the gas ballons to open up where Moldarak is. That could have been a cool use of time shift zones, maybe. But it's one of those dungeons where it's like it's okay. It's an alright dungeon. It's not the worst one, but it's an okay dungeon. So yeah. For number 4 is the Fire Sanctuary. Now this is probably the better fire temple in the game because you're not on a giant ball for 90% of it, and I think this game or this dungeon has better puzzles than in the Earth Temple. For instance, I think towards the end of the dungeon, if you want to get to the boss key, you have to light up these torches, and I'm not going to spoil it because I think it's a quite a clever way of doing it, but that's a really cool clever puzzle, in which you have to do it, just to navigate like what you can see on above you as well as going to the correct things. And also before that, there was also these two giant statue things, and again, I'm not going to spoil the puzzle if it's your first time playing the game, but I do like how that sort of puzzle is used and how you're given hints to how to solve it throughout the dungeon, and you're also given the digging mitts, which is I think a different version of the Mogma mitts you get earlier in the game, because instead of just digging at places which can just give you hearts or rupees or materials, you can actually go and burrow your way down and go to other places like I think outside of the Fire Sanctuary you can go to a place where you can get a heart piece, and then in the sky you can go to similar places that have this sort of thing, which you can go to get goddess chests and stuff like that. And also Girahim, it makes a return appearance as the boss, and I think when it comes to boss fights with him, I think he's a better boss fight when you compare him to the Imprisoned, because with the Imprisoned, even though both the Imprisoned and Girahim are essentially the same fights, but with different changes to each one, I would say the Girahim fights are a lot more better and get a lot more intense as each fight goes on. Because with the Imprisoned, it's just stop the Imprisoned from getting to the sealed temple, but now he can climb the wall and now he can fly. But with Girahim, with the second fight, his arms are now like armor, and then with the final fight, he's completely covered in this like armor-like substance stuff. So that's quite cool. And yeah, I think as a whole, the Fire Sanctuary is a whole lot much more fun and a better fire temple than the Earth Temple. So yeah. For number 3 is the Sky Keep. Now, this dungeon is probably the most unique dungeon in the whole game, because it's the only dungeon in the game where you can create different ways to get the different Triforce pieces, and it's kind of like if you've played the Link's Awakening remake and you've played through some of the dungeon maker thing. It's kind of like that, but with a whole actual dungeon instead of just being a side bit of content and part of the game. So yeah, and I do like how in the Skykeep you've got all these different rooms that correlate to the different dungeons. So you've got some areas that are like the Lenari's mining facility and the sand ship. You've got places like the Earth Temple and the Fire Sanctuary, and you've got all these different rooms that are really cool and unique, and they all have their own unique puzzles. Like you've got one where you have to try and hit these crystals in a specific order. You have to try and have to fight another robot captain, but this time it's in a wooded foresty area, and that's really cool. And in order to move the different parts of the temple around, you have to find these different stone tablets, and you have to really think on your feet on like, okay, I'm in this area in this part of the dungeon. I had to move these rooms all over the place. I had to move like this Triforce piece to over here, but I can't get to this other part if I move this part. And the only thing that's kind of annoys me, and which brings the temple down a bit, is that you can't move the temple or the room that you're in. So let's say I was in the room where you fight the other robot captain guy, because of the stone tablet in that one. You can't move that particular one, but you can move the others around. And that's, I think, kind of clever, but also very limiting, because you can only move so many pieces around without having to being sort of like being limited by the amount of moves you can make and stuff like that. So yeah, still enjoyable dungeon. I think that particular part brings it down a bit. So yeah, for number 2 is the Ancient Cistern. Now this, I would say, is a very, I think, fun and nice way of playing through a dungeon, because it's kind of like the Skykeep in a sort of sense, but instead of having to move bits of or move rooms of the dungeon around, you have to move the central column, which is basically this giant statue, from either the tranquil, almost heavenly part of the dungeon down to this hell-looking landscape of the dungeon, because I believe the Ancient Cistern is based on some religious story. I think it's some sort of like Buddhist story. I don't know how much I remember. I'll probably put it in the description below so you guys can look for yourselves. But yeah, and I do like how each of the areas feel so different, and so because they feel so different. And this is house to probably the best boss in the game, Coloctos, because Coloctos is like this giant golden statue thing, and it's got like multiple arms, and then throughout half of the then throughout when you get to the second phase, it can walk, because in the first half it's like in this like encased in like this sort of like circular disc, and then it just comes out of the ground and starts chasing you. And plus, it's like I believe one of the only bosses, if not the only boss, to protect its weak spot, because its weak spot is this giant red orb thing, and in the first phase it uses its hands to cover it, and then in the second phase it uses its metallic gate to cover it. So yeah, that's so cool, and it's such a cool boss to fight, and I think it's such a really nice way of fighting a boss. And also it's probably the only sort of like water dungeon, because there are some water parts in the dungeon that it doesn't suck. It's a water dungeon that doesn't suck. So that's really quite cool. And for number 1 is the sand ship. Now I would say this is kind of similar to the whole Fire Sanctuary Earth Temple thing that I was talking about earlier, in that the sand ship is a better sand area than the Lenari's mining facility, in that you're on one giant ship, and there are multiple rooms, but it's mainly just one huge dungeon. And you can say that for the other ones, but they're all separated into their own different things. But with the sand ship, you go to all these different rooms, and you have to try and reactivate the ship to get the sacred flame. And it's similar to the Lenarium mining facility in that you have to shoot a time shift stone to get it from the past to the future and the future into the past. It's one of those things. And I do like the build up to it before you do go to the dungeon, and that you have to go to all these different locations like the shipyard, the pirate stronghold, and then find out, oh, it's invisible. I have to hit it with the cannons. And I do like the whole pirate theme because you've got for the mini dungeon or for the mini boss this pirate captain that stole the whole ship, and you've also got one of the not best bosses in the game, that being Tantalus. But I do like the whole concept of the boss and the theme of it. That being, it's a giant kraken monster. It's here to destroy the ship. That's what you see you may see in pirate themed media like films or TV shows or games or whatever that have pirates in it. And yeah, it feels so piratey and it feels so cool. And I do like how when you get the bow and arrow in the dungeon, you can use it to hit the time shift stone in various parts of the dungeon to help you get across certain areas and stuff like that. So that's really cool. It's probably the best dungeon in the game as a whole. So yeah. So that's been me ranking the Skyward Sword dungeons from worst to best. I hope you enjoyed this video. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. And I'll see you in the next video.